This is the kind of move that can either push a franchise into Super Bowl territory or explode in everybody's face. Because right now, one of the biggest names in football is still sitting out there waiting for a phone call. And if Ryan Poles decides to make that call, Caleb Williams could suddenly get the most dangerous veteran weapon of his entire career. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and join the strongest Bears community out there because this season is shaping up to be something special. Bears fans, we need to have a serious conversation. Not a fantasy football conversation. Not a Madden conversation. A real football conversation. Because the name Stefon Diggs is creating reactions all over Chicago right now, and depending on who you ask, this is either a genius move or a disaster waiting to happen. The moment people hear the name Stefon Diggs, they immediately split into two groups. One group remembers the elite route runner. The technician. The guy who could embarrass defensive backs with footwork alone. The five-time Pro Bowler who built a reputation as one of the smartest receivers in football. The player who continued producing at a high level even after turning 32 years old. Then there is the other side. The side that remembers Buffalo. The headlines. The rumors. The tension. The questions about leadership and locker room chemistry. And that is exactly why this debate is so fascinating. Because both sides have legitimate arguments. But if you really look at the full picture, this situation becomes a lot more interesting than people realize. First of all, let's talk facts. Stefon Diggs was released by New England after putting together another productive season. Reports indicate the Patriots moved on largely because of financial reasons and the massive cap hit attached to the later years of his contract. It was not because he suddenly forgot how to play football. It was not because his production disappeared. The numbers still showed a receiver capable of helping a contender. That matters. Because the NFL tells you exactly how it feels about players through contracts and roster decisions. And in this case, the discussion was much more about money than ability. Now let me ask you something. If a receiver can still put up over 1,000 yards at this stage of his career, why are so many people acting like he is completely washed? That is the question nobody wants to answer honestly. Because the reality is that Diggs still knows how to get open. He still understands leverage. He still understands defensive structures. He still understands how to create separation in critical moments. And those are skills that do not disappear overnight. Especially when you are talking about a player whose game has always been built on intelligence rather than pure speed. But here's where this conversation gets really interesting. Forget Stefon Diggs for a second. Forget the rumors. Forget the speculation. Let's talk about Caleb Williams. Because this entire discussion should be centered around one thing. What gives Caleb Williams the best chance to become the quarterback Bears fans have been waiting decades to see? That is the real question. And when you start looking at it from that angle, Diggs suddenly becomes a lot more intriguing. Think about it. Young quarterbacks do not just need talent around them. They need teachers. They need veterans. They need players who understand the details most fans never even notice. Pre-snap leverage. Defensive disguises. Route adjustments. Coverage recognition. Timing. Spacing. All the tiny details that separate good offenses from championship offenses. Those things matter. And according to reports surrounding Diggs' time in New England, he played an important role in helping Drake May develop as a young quarterback. That is not the profile of a selfish player who only cares about statistics. That is the profile of a veteran who understands the game at an advanced level. Now imagine Caleb Williams getting that influence every single day. Imagine Caleb seeing how Diggs studies film. How he attacks practice. How he reads coverage. How he communicates during route concepts. Those are things you cannot measure on a stat sheet. Those are things that help build championship quarterbacks. And that brings us to Ben Johnson. Because if anybody is going to make this work, it is him. Let's be honest. Ben Johnson did not come to Chicago to build a soft culture. Everything we have seen from him suggests accountability comes first. Standards come first. Winning comes first. There is no room for distractions. There is no room for excuses. And that is why I actually think Diggs could fit. A lot of people forget something important. Diggs spent time playing under Mike Vrabel, one of the toughest coaches in football, and by all accounts remained productive and professional within that structure. That matters. Because it shows that when expectations are clear and communication is strong, Diggs can absolutely function within a winning environment. And if Ben Johnson decides he wants him, I trust that evaluation. Question for you early in this video: would you rather trust social media narratives, or trust Ben Johnson's ability to evaluate whether a player fits his locker room? Because those are two very different things. Now let's talk football. Actual football. Because this offense could become terrifying. Imagine Luther Burden stretching defenses vertically. Imagine Roma Odunze attacking the perimeter. Imagine Colston Loveland working the middle of the field. Now add Stefon Diggs into that equation. Defensive coordinators would be forced into impossible decisions. Who gets doubled? Who gets bracket coverage? Who gets the favorable matchup? Because somebody is getting left one-on-one. And that somebody is probably winning. That is why this move is so attractive. Not because Diggs needs to be the WR1. Not because he needs 1,500 yards. Not because he needs to dominate the offense. The beauty of this move is exactly the opposite. He would not have to carry the entire load. He could simply become another weapon. Another problem. Another matchup nightmare. And that could be enough to elevate the entire offense. But now we have to talk about the player who may have completely changed the future of this franchise. Colston Loveland. Bears fans, what this kid accomplished as a rookie is absolutely ridiculous. And somehow it feels like people still are not talking about it enough. Because while everyone is debating wide receivers, Loveland might already be becoming the most important receiving weapon on the roster. Read that again. Not the most important tight end. The most important receiving weapon. Reports and grading data throughout the season consistently placed Loveland among the highest performing rookies in football, and his impact in critical situations became impossible to ignore. And when you watched the games, you could feel it. Every big moment. Every pressure situation. Every must-have conversion. Somehow the ball kept finding number 18. That is not an accident. That is trust. The greatest quarterbacks always have that guy. The player they trust when everything is collapsing. When the crowd is losing its mind. When the defense knows the ball is coming. When the season is on the line. Tom Brady had that. Patrick Mahomes has that. And Caleb Williams may already have that connection developing with Loveland. Think about how crazy that is. The Bears spent years searching for offensive identity. Years searching for consistency. Years searching for reliability. Now they might have found a superstar tight end before he even turns 23 years old. Question of the day: if the game is on the line with one play left, who are you trusting more right now, Colston Loveland or any Bears wide receiver? Comment below. Because I genuinely think that debate is closer than people realize. And that brings us to Roma Odunze. Nobody should panic. But nobody should sugarcoat reality either. This season is enormous for him. Absolutely enormous. Because there is pressure now. Real pressure. The kind of pressure that separates stars from role players. Before injuries interrupted his momentum, Odunze showed flashes of exactly why Chicago invested so heavily in him. Explosive plays. Big game ability. Improved yards per catch. Signs of growth. The talent is obvious. Nobody questions the talent. The question is consistency. The question is availability. The question is whether he can become the guy everyone believes he can be. Because while he is fighting to establish himself, Luther Burden keeps generating excitement. Burden keeps generating headlines. Burden keeps generating buzz. And competition changes everything. Sometimes competition destroys confidence. Sometimes competition creates greatness. This season will tell us which path Odunze chooses. And honestly, that is one of the most fascinating storylines on the entire roster. Because if Odunze explodes this year, the Bears suddenly have one of the most dangerous young receiving groups in football. But if he struggles, the conversations become a lot different. Now let's shift to the offensive line. Because championships are not won by skill players alone. Everybody wants to talk about touchdowns. Nobody wants to talk about protection. But protection is why offenses survive. And right now there are some very encouraging developments happening in Chicago. Braxton Jones appears positioned to get the first opportunity at left tackle. Which honestly makes sense. Experience matters. Continuity matters. Trust matters. And Jones has already proven he can handle NFL snaps. But the biggest development may be Garrett Bradbury. Because the moment Drew Delman retired, Chicago suddenly had a major problem. And major problems require immediate solutions. That is where Bradbury entered the picture. From the first OTA sessions, Ben Johnson publicly praised Bradbury's communication, leadership, and ability to organize the offensive line. Those comments stood out because communication is everything for a center position. Think about what that means. The center is not just snapping the football. The center is directing traffic, identifying pressure, managing protections, keeping everybody aligned, keeping chaos under control. And according to Johnson, Bradbury immediately showed those qualities. That is exactly what you want protecting your franchise quarterback. Because the fastest way to ruin a promising season is allowing your quarterback to get hit constantly. Chicago understands that. Ben Johnson understands that. Ryan Poles understands that. Which is why the offensive line remains one of the most important storylines heading into camp. And before we finish, we need to talk about Tyson Bagent. Because I think people are massively underrating how important he is. Recently, there have been discussions about his trade value. Some evaluations suggest he might only bring back a late-round draft pick. And honestly, if that is the offer, I am hanging up the phone immediately. Why? Because contenders need insurance. Every single year we watch playoff teams get destroyed by quarterback injuries. Every year. Depth matters. And Bagent has already shown he belongs in this league. He knows the system. He knows the locker room. He understands the expectations. And most importantly, the coaching staff clearly believes in him. A future 6th-round pick sounds nice until your starting quarterback misses games. Then suddenly the draft pick means absolutely nothing. Keeping Bagent is not about planning for failure. It is about preparing for reality. And serious contenders prepare for reality. When you put all of these pieces together, you start seeing why Bears fans are so excited. This is not the same old Chicago. This is not a rebuilding project. This is not a roster searching for direction. This is a team with expectations. A team with pressure. A team that believes it can compete with anybody. You have Caleb Williams continuing his rise. You have Ben Johnson establishing a culture. You have Colston Loveland looking like a future superstar. You have Roma Odunze fighting for a breakthrough season. You have an offensive line trying to solidify itself. You have Tyson Bagent providing important depth. And hanging over all of it is one massive question. Stefon Diggs. If Ryan Poles makes the move, this offense becomes even more dangerous. Maybe Diggs never returns to his absolute peak. Maybe he is not the same player he was 5 years ago. But that is not the standard. The standard is whether he can help this team win a championship. And I believe the answer is yes. Not because he needs to be the savior. Not because he needs to carry the offense. But because he could become one more weapon in his system already loaded with talent. One more veteran voice. One more matchup problem. One more reason opposing defensive coordinators lose sleep at night. And if the Bears truly believe their Super Bowl window is opening right now, then these are exactly the types of aggressive decisions contenders make. The next few weeks are going to be fascinating. Because one signature could completely change the conversation around this offense. And if that signature belongs to Stefon Diggs, the rest of the NFL better start paying attention. Bear down.